Hi friends, it's Carly and I'm back with another review. We are moving right along through our Ghostbusters Plasma series figures, and the next on our list today is Peter Venkman. So I didn't look at the packaging on the last figure that I did, which was Ray, because I showed it on the first. But for those of you who missed those first two videos, I really wanted to show off the packaging that these came in again. Just briefly, each package has the name badge from the jumpsuit of the character that's in the box. It's got a really beautiful matte finish, and I said I don't talk about these very often, but in this particular case, they added these incredible portraits of each Ghostbuster on the side. And we are today on Peter. And each of these comes with a piece for this bath figure here. It is Vin's Clortho, which is the Terror Hound from the end of the first film. So that is the final figure that we'll be looking at. I will be doing a video a day until we get through these, just so that we can get to the good stuff as soon as possible. So that all said, here we are on Peter Venkman. I have talked about how Ray and Egon are two of my favorite Ghostbusters, but let's be real, if you're a fan and you're from this era, it's really difficult to choose a favorite, because who doesn't love how snarky Peter is? And definitely Bill Murray is one of my favorite actors of all time ever, and seeing him side by side with some of the greatest minds in comedy and some of the greatest actors in one of the best films of the 80s really was just a treat for everybody. So it's hard to say that Bill Murray as Peter Venkman isn't my favorite character. All of that said, without rambling on any further, let's go ahead and look at the figure. So as usual with these figures, I feel like the facial sculpt is spot on. And you know what I think is really funny and really appropriate about this facial sculpt? First of all, it is obviously Bill Murray. But secondly, I was watching the film the other day, again, for the millionth time, but you know, just to be fresh on everything when I did the review. And I was reminded, kind of, not for the first time, but reminded again about what kind of a jerk Peter really is and how, like, creepy he is with women. And I'm talking about in one of the first scenes of the film where he's doing the psychic test with that beautiful girl and that sort of nerdy boy who actually seems to be a little bit psychic. And rather than just tell him that he got it wrong when he actually got it right, Peter goes out of his way to, like, electrocute him. So the point of that story is that it was a really funny scene. It was very silly. And it sort of painted the picture of, like, what kind of a cad Peter really is. And this facial expression, I think, perfectly sort of captures that moment in the film. He's just sort of this, like, philandering, funny man who's out for the ladies and kind of just out for himself in general. Like, really just whatever suits Peter is what he's going to go after. And I think that this facial sculpt really captures that sort of snarky, funny, charming, but also a little bit narcissistic spirit that Peter has. So this is a great sculpt, in my opinion. And everything else, as we've seen with the figures thus far, is pretty standard. He's got the jumpsuit, which is a perfect tribute to the jumpsuit in the films. Again, we're seeing it baggy and a little bit bulky because it's over a full set of clothes. His name badge with his name stitched into it, Venkman, which is much longer than the other names we've seen so far. So it's pretty amazing that it fits on there so clearly. We've got our super 80s white utility belt, black gloves. Peter's accessory is the actual ghost trap itself. So I put that in his hand so you could see, let's get focused again, how the accessory works in his hand. And it looks good, I think. There we go. It's a simple accessory. All the accessories, other than the actual proton pack itself, are really simple with this series so far. And I think, you know, it is what it is. There's no need to reinvent the wheel with this series. It's so iconic. So I feel like it's a good accessory, and it sits in his hand really nicely. It works really well with the figure. It's appropriately proportioned and easy for him to hold on to. Black gloves, black elbow pads that we see here, and black boots. So that is the standard costume. We'll go over the articulation points and some of the finer details when we take off the proton pack, which is, again, the same as all of the others. Beautifully crafted, some really nice detail in there. true to the film, not overwhelming. Now, this time I was able to actually hook the wand, which I think is called the neutrino wand, to the side of the proton pack. So there is I've been struggling with this accessory with the last two figures, wondering where I'm supposed to stick it, and my Ray, none of his accessories really worked very well, so I think I might have just had a defective one there. Egon, I just didn't know, so I did it inappropriately. And thank you to a comment from one of the viewers, I figured out where I was supposed to use it, and this time it actually fits perfectly. So here is the neutrino wand, and it sticks right to the side via this little clasp and button. So this time it works perfectly. It actually snaps in. You feel a distinct snap and it stays put. So the accessory on this figure is perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and take the trap out of his hand here, and we will look at, on the left hand side, the clip. Venkman is a little bit more fit than our friend Ray, so he doesn't have the belly that is preventing me from clasping his harness to his pack. But we do notice that it is a little bit irregular, so it sort of like crosses up along his belly rather than sitting down lower against his belt, which is where I feel like it should sit. So that's a little, I mean, it just looks a little bit strange, but all said and done, the most important thing is that it works, and this one definitely does. So here is the button. We'll go ahead and pop that off. And just to show you guys again, let's see, it just pops off like this. Just to show again, as we're removing it, that it pegs into his back here. Right here. So you can see that it is anchored to his back via that peg. And then it just slides right over his head and off his arm. So it's, again, really easy to remove, and it's working. When it's working properly, it looks really great, and this one seems to. So I think the design of the proton pack itself is great. I don't think that it inherently has any flaws. I think I might have just had some production issues with the ones that I've received so far. So this one works great, and thanks to comments that I got, I'm gonna find out who the person is and name them. I was able to actually figure out how this was supposed to sit properly on the figure. So thank you for that. I always read your comments and they're really helpful. So if you notice me doing something silly, please let me know and I will fix it. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the figure. So we've already looked at the facial sculpt, and the costume and our jumpsuit is exactly as it should be. The points of articulation we've spoken about before, but in case this is your very first video ever, we'll go head to feet, top to bottom, and look at all of those points. Now, I do have a little bit of a flaw on the head of my character, or on my figure. If you look underneath, he's got a flaw here on his jawline. And it's kind of difficult to pick out, but right here is a chunk of plastic, and it actually does hinder motion. So that's why I'm pointing that out. It is clearly a production flaw, but while we do get the 360-degree turn, there's something about the way that this head was put on that is a little bit off, and you'll notice, I think you can see it best from the back, but also from the front, that this Peter has virtually no neck at all. His head sits really, really low down there. You can see that his jawline is almost in his collarbone. And when you look from the back, you can see that there is no distinction between his shoulders and his neck. So that is a little bit strange. While the facial sculpt is spot on for me, he needs a little bit more length in his neck to be a realistic looking figure. The width of it is fine, and really head on, he looks okay. But as you start to turn the figure around, you see the lack of neck is a little bit bothersome. It's a little bit troubling and strange looking. Other than that, everything else on the sculpt is great. The paintwork is beautiful. It looks just like it ought to, with the appropriate logos. There's our ghost, our nameplate, and everything else is just paintwork with no graphics at all. So the arms, we have great lateral motion that is easy to use. We have turning here at the top of the joint in the armpit. We have turning here at the bicep, 360 degrees. We have a double jointed elbow. that, again, I've talked about this with the previous figures. If you're looking at it from the side, it has a very strange square shape to it, like this. And if you're looking at the side of the elbow, you can see that it sort of is very angular. But for the elbows, it's not as much of a problem, because normally when you're bending the arm, you're bending it forward. Rarely, if ever, would you be looking at the elbow. And when you do, because of the elbow pad, it's not that bad. So it's a little bit strange looking on the elbow, but not that big a deal. And then we have the hands, which turn 360 degrees. But again, it's problematic for me that the wrist of the hand turns side to side like this, but not back to front like this. This is a very strange motion to have instead of this, especially when the character or when the figure has a handheld accessory like the wand that they would be holding in their hands. It makes far more sense for them to be able to move their wrist forward to grip it than it does for them to be able to move it side to side like this. Let's get a closer look at what that looks like. So we have no forward and backward motion here. All of the motion in the wrist is down and up. So we've got down, up, round, and then none forward and back. That's a strange choice for me, and I've mentioned it on the last two figures, so I would be remiss not to mention it again because they'll all be like that. But that said, everything in the arms works really well. We again have no motion movement in the torso, and that's probably because of the proton pack accessory. It wouldn't really work pegged into his back if you could move this portion. So our movement comes from the hips, as it does on a human body, and here in the waist. So the waist turns 360 degrees. Let's see, let's get focus again. We've got legs that go out to the sides. Let's see. We've got motion to the front and to the back. We've got turning here in the thigh, 360 degrees. This is where it gets a little weird for me. These joints are always incredibly stiff, but when you do finally get them to go, the double jointed knees, this is what the look is from the side. And from the knee itself, it is just a very clunky, strange, not very human looking joint. So I find the knees on these very, very weird, but you know, when they're trying to recreate what a leg looks like in a jumpsuit, in a pair of pants underneath that, so we've got a full set of clothes underneath, it makes a little bit more sense that it would be bulky, but I think there might have been a better way to do this just overall, just to make it look better. So yeah, that's strange to me. And then the feet bend forward, they bend backwards, and then they have a ball and socket joint that function the way that ball and socket joints do. There we go. So the articulation on these again is really, really great. The hands are a little bit strange to me. And on this particular Venkman figure, while his head does turn, it does lift, not as much as I would like to see if we're looking here from the side. We've got the downward motion, but not really so much up, partially because of his hair, but also partially because he just doesn't have a neck. So that's a little bit strange for me. That's a new one. On the other two figures, there was no issue with the neck, head turning, lifting, or lowering at all. I have mentioned with Egon that I wish that the head would tilt up a little bit more, because I feel like when they were you know, actually busting ghosts, that they were looking up at them, and that is a pose that I think when you have this entire set that you would want to see, in addition to a blast accessory that you could use with the wand. So those are two things that are really missing for me. Without being able to lift the head, the blast accessory seems a little less necessary, but it is bothersome that they didn't think to include that, especially since it wouldn't really add anything additional to the price. It shouldn't cost much extra to add that in there, and the accessories other than the proton pack are so tiny that it would be a great bonus to have, and it would really make the set. Other than that, I like this figure a lot, again, because the facial sculpts are spot on. So the little things that bother me on each of these figures, each of them has something, but the little things that aren't working are really made up in spades by the beautiful facial sculpt on these. And I think that, you know, when you're a nostalgia collector, this is clearly a nostalgia piece. We're looking at a classic film that is beloved by a couple of generations now. And at this point, being able to look at the character and recognize who the actor is, who the person is probably the most important part of the figure altogether. So things like a slightly wonky joint, maybe not having a complete range of motion in the neck or the head, having like a funny looking elbow, those are all things worth noting, but nothing worth preventing me from buying these figures because they do look so beautiful. So all that said, I really like this figure. I'm a huge Bill Murray fan, and this definitely looks like him. It captures the spirit of Peter, who's a little bit of a creep, we all know, but the kind of creep we love as well. And I'm happy to add this to the rest of the collection, side by side with the guys. So our next figure will be Winston. We'll be looking at him tomorrow, and then we'll get into the really good stuff. So we've got our final two supernatural characters and then the bath itself. We're going to be doing these one after another in the following days. So make sure to stay tuned to the channel. If you guys have any comments or questions about the series so far, I'd be happy to answer those for you. And if you have recommendations of other videos you'd like to see, let me know that in the comments below. I also have the classic Real Ghostbusters figures that were just re-released at Walmart. And if you guys are interested in seeing me do a review of those figures, let me know and I will do that next. Thanks so much for watching my video, guys. I hope you are having a great day, and I will be back tomorrow with another one. Bye, friends.